Who has the signal? You? I'm delighted to welcome you on behalf of the Synod of the United Church in Jamaica and the Cayman Islands to this economic forum in this time which needs no introduction. Every human being in the world knows this critical time in which we find ourselves in the midst of a pandemic. I'm very, very happy that Webster has offered to host us in this way, in the first of what might become a number of fora discussing issues related to how, as human beings, we cope in a situation such as this. The economic issues, some might claim, are not the issues of the church. And yet, by now, Jamaica should understand the very significant role of the church in our society. Our church in Jamaica, and I speak, I believe, ecumenically, understands very well the role we have in a society where issues of ethics and morals must be called into question. So that we are in a crisis in the world and in our society, both here and in Cayman. And it is the church, it is to the church to live through its responsibility as a prophet for the time such as this. You know, Micah, in chapter 6 and verse 8, that prophet asks the question, how ought we to live? And God answers it, for he has shown you, O man, what is good. What does the Lord require of you but to do justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God? There's just so much about this particular crisis across the globe that tells us that we have lived in a so-called normal world in which so many of the kingdom values were not the values being upheld. The values of justice, the loving of mercy, and to be humble. If nothing else, this virus has shown that in many places in the leadership in the world and the followership as well, we are yet to discover how much we are not in control. And you know, the issues of justice are at the center of these concerns. And as this panel discusses the economic issues, I'm sure that some of these issues of justice, of mercy and compassion, and of humility will come to the fore in the discussion here. For we have seen in a world in which the inequities and the injustice of the so-called old norm are such that the pain and grief of this pandemic is being borne disproportionately by those who are poor. I trust they are going to discuss in detail what this pandemic can say to us about the kingdom values. We don't need to blame God for causing a pandemic, for God to speak lessons of truth to us in it. And so I most warmly welcome you and welcome this erudite panel. And I'll hand over, just after we have given the afternoon into the hands of God, to our moderator, Orville Johnson. Mr. Johnson is a well-known financial commentator and executive director of the Insurance Association of Jamaica. No doubt they will lead us into God's understanding of what a pandemic means and what it means to be Christian and to live as Christian people in a challenge such as this. Let us pray. we bow in your mighty presence. Humbled, great God, by this truth that we are not in control. And you, O God, are our loving God. You are the God who comforts your people. And we take comfort in the knowledge that in the midst of this great challenge, you stand in the midst with us. We thank you, gracious God, that we never need to feel like we are a people alone and in despair. So we pray that you would rise up within your church. You would raise up those who would stand especially for the least among those of us, so that as we discuss economic issues, as we contemplate the challenges in persons' lives here in Jamaica, in Cayman, across the Caribbean, indeed across the world, that we will never forget that our God has taken the part, the side of the poor, that in Jesus Christ you have come to make whole and to bring healing and strength when we are most in need. Yes, indeed, it is when we are weakest that we can know the strength of the God who accompanies us. So be with us. Speak your truth in us, and may we benefit from knowledge, wisdom, and understanding as declared here today and as shared among your gathered people. And we give you thanks in Jesus' name. Amen.
Thank you very much, Gordon, for those words of inspiration. We certainly are going to need it as we pass through this tumultuous time that we find ourselves in. COVID-19 has descended upon us like a thief in the night. And just after 4.5 months, it has infected 4.6 million persons, 1.7 million recovering, and 312,000 persons dying. This pandemic literally has spared no country. Jamaica, we have seen 517 cases with 118 recoveries and just 9 deaths, thankfully. While our neighbors to the north, to whom we are tied to economically and otherwise, have seen 1.5 million persons who have been infected, 89,498 deaths up to today, but only 274,000, or 1/6, have been recovering. This pandemic has created an utter collapse, as we would say in Jamaica, both from a health point of view and from the economic implications. More importantly, the human cost may be catastrophic. I really like to quote a certain world leader, but I have to admit that no one ever seen something like this before. I am pleased that as a church community, we are putting on this seminar using the online platform, which has now become the new normal. As a people of faith, we believe that this too will pass. A lot of what we now take for granted was achieved by our forebears. A lot of what we have just simply passed on has been achieved by hard work. We have faced slavery, world wars, famine, and pestilences of all kinds. We never signed up for this, but every society has to respond to the challenges of its time. If we fail, history will be unkind to us. We shall overcome. We will get over this. We are survivors of the atrocities of the Middle Passage. We can do this. We must do this. Or as the new phrase goes, we got this. It is not going to be easy. Our Minister of Finance has advised us that the government now forecasts that the GDP will, for 2020-21 fiscal year, will fall by 5.1%. They have just had to adjust their budget to the tune of $120 billion to reflect both declining revenues and the increase in expenditure related to the COVID-19 virus. Almost everyone and his auntie are asking for a bailout. Tourism encountered a body blow with the various travel restrictions as the hotel and the cruise ships business have been shuttered, leaving many in the hospitality workers without a livelihood, while remittances have fallen 15 to 20%. Local job losses have been piling up, especially in the retail trade, as layoffs are announced daily. The silver lining is that plans are being put together as we speak to renew or get back to normalcy, which is not going to be business as usual, but a new normal with both challenges and opportunities. We have a panel who are well poised and well experienced in these matters, and we expect them to give us the kind of guidance and stimulate our thinking as we all work together to bring this country that we love so much back to normal. You can send your questions via our live stream or YouTube or Facebook. We want to especially welcome our three presenters. Professor Denzel Williams will speak first, and he is a professor of international business at the University of the West Indies. Ms. Nadine Spence is well-known media commentator and, more importantly, a member of the Committee for COVID Recovery, that task force who are going to help us to put things together. So we especially welcome her, and we are looking forward to what she has to say and to see how we can all play a role. And last but by no means least, a businesswoman, Dr. Ernestine Watson from Everybody's Pharmacy. Because at the end of the day, we have to create an environment where we can put persons back to work. So we got to get the businesses back together and get the consumer spending. So the way we're going to work things this afternoon is that each person will speak for 10 minutes and raise some issues, and then afterwards we'll entertain questions. I'm going to ask Professor Williams, you are the first speaker. Could you go right ahead? You can stay right here. Yeah. If you prefer to go to the podium, it's okay too.
Good. Okay. Thank you very much, Orville, and let me also thank the members of the Webster Church for inviting me to speak, and let me say good evening to my colleagues on the panel and also to the online audience that is watching us this afternoon. It's such an important thing, Orville, to engage in a discussion at this time as it relates to the issue of COVID-19 and the impact on the economy. And I would like to start by saying you have given a very substantial overview in terms of the economic space and some of the things that we expect to happen as this thing unravels. Now, I want to make a few opening comments as it relates to some facts that we know and also how we see the economy post-COVID and some of the things that we should really be focusing on in order to move forward or as we move forward. So the first thing I would like to say is that there are some known facts. You have given some good highlights, Orville, of the impact to date. But I will say to you that while I appreciate the quantification of the impact to date, I must say to you that I think that we are way, way premature in placing any kind of numbers on these kinds of impacts. What we do know, however, is that the impact will be quite massive. To say exactly what the quantity is a bit premature. And why do I say that? I say that because we still do not know how long the virus is going to be with us in the form that it is now. That's one. And then the second thing, we do not know how long the containment measures are going to be in place. And as a result of that, it is very early for us to be putting numbers to the impact. But we can have something to start with. But what we do know is that, one, unemployment will be rising and rising significantly. That's what we do know. We're looking at, if you just take any, slight prediction of where the numbers are today, and even using the figures as we know as of today in terms of the number of people who have been laid off for the last few weeks or so, we're looking at unemployment reaching the level of about 30% in the very short term. That's what we do know that is going to be significant. What we also know is that there's going to be significant fall off in government revenues because of the significant fall off in economic activities, as we would have seen from the last few months as well. And similarly, what we do know is that from a growth perspective, growth is going to be significantly impacted in 2020. Now, the magnitude, as you would have heard, people are predicting from 3% to 5.6% is the highest I've heard so far in the context of Jamaica. The wider Caribbean, I've seen figures of 8% and stuff. So what we do know is that if we should decline by about 5%, and we should continue the growth path that we have been on pre the COVID era, it is going to take us a significant time for us to get back to pre-COVID levels of GDP. It could take us about 10 years or so if we remain on that growth path. So what we do know is that we will have to significantly improve our growth post-COVID in order to get back to a pre-COVID level, if we are going to see any semblance of normalcy coming back to our GDP. And that is not something that you can take lightly, because for the last 40 years or so, Jamaica has not grown at anything close to 3%. And if we are to get back to pre-crisis level in any time soon, we would have to be growing at 3% and above, if we have that kind of contraction that is now being predicted. So all in all, what I'm saying is that it's going to be a tough time ahead. It's not going to be simple. It's not going to be easy. What we're going to see is significant fall off that is going to take some time to get back to any level of normalcy, especially as it relates to the job market as well. The kinds of unemployment that we're seeing now, yes, it will reduce, it will decrease over time, but to get back to the levels that we have now of the 7% or so, it is going to take us some significant amount of time as well. So it's going to require new thinking if we're going to deal with these things going forward. And one of the things that we're going to see is that we're going to have to start looking at new economic sectors in terms of trying to stimulate growth in the macroeconomy post-COVID. So the digital economy is going to have to be a big thing. We're going to have to focus a lot on the creative economy, or they call it the orange economy, because it is going to be things like intellectual property and your kinds of skill sets that you can transfer and service over the internet that is going to generate a lot of the economic flourish. But the kind of physical contact, coming close together kind of activities, we're going to see much less of that post-COVID. And so the new normal is going to be a lot of digital interaction, a lot of creative stuff that you're going to have to do. So those are going to be the things that we will have to be looking at to stimulate the economy going forward. The new ways of doing business is also going to be critical, because what you're going to see is that a lot of the businesses that depend on physical contact, for example, the festivals and concerts and those types of things, we're going to be seeing less of those. And even if we have them, we're going to be seeing less numbers. And so as a result of that, the kind of economic spin-off that you would normally get, you're going to have less of that going forward. So there are going to have to be new ways of conceptualizing and doing those things, even in the academic sector, going to university, going to school as we normally see. You're going to have less in-class interaction, and so a lot of the spin-off economies that come from universities and schools, etc., we're not going to be having those in the same way that we would have had before. So what we're seeing, colleagues, is that recovery will be long. If Jamaica is going to continue on the pre-COVID path, we'll have to find new ways and new things to do in order to take us to a new growth level that is going to have to that we're going to be requiring. Now, a big part of this is going to be the requirement that people have cash in their hands. People are going to need cash, and that is why it is so important that the care program and those programs that are going on now going to have to continue for a little bit longer than we actually projected, because people need cash in their hands. People are going to have money. And so what we are going to be seeing is we're going to have to find those economic activities in the short term that is going to put back cash in people's hands. And so capital projects that the government has planned, they have a significant over $76 billion of capital project planned for 2020-21. Now, what we cannot do, and which is a signal that I've seen sent in the revised budget that was presented to Parliament, I think last week, Wednesday, is a cutback in capital projects. I think that's the wrong direction. I think we have to literally beef up the capital projects, or at least spend what is it that we had committed to. Because that is where building the bridges, building the roads, doing the kinds of activities that is going to put back cash in the hands of the people. So as best as possible, what we need to do is to safeguard the capital project. So what we need to do is to look at some new ways how we could safeguard that $30 billion that is coming from the capital projects. And one of the ideas that come to my mind very quickly, we have over $287 billion that we'll be paying out in debt and interest and amortization on the debt for 2020-21. Now, it is not beyond us in a time of sacrifice, in a time of unprecedented economic fallout, that we have to look at our debt holders and say, we have $132 billion of interest to give you this year, but given the unprecedented nature of what is happening, we're asking you to reschedule $30 billion so that we do not have to cut our capital budget and reschedule this until we get back some normalcy. So we're not asking you to throw it away, we're not asking you to give it away, we're asking you to reschedule it, to give us some breathing space, if you wish, to give us an oxygen tank, so that we can have this type of capital injected into the economy, continue to do the capital works, put back money into the hands of people. The capital market, yes, is going to react, but the question that you ask yourself, do you want to see hungry and sick people who don't have any means of getting out of this situation, lining the streets in the country? Or do you want to have your capital market be very, the few people benefiting in the capital market having a significant big bank account, but the majority of people don't have anything? What would you like? What would you prefer? And I think it's time to have that conversation. As I said, we're not reneging on our debt. We are not asking you to take a haircut. We're not asking those things. What we're asking you to do is to have a conversation about how we reschedule that $132 billion and say, save the capital works and give up something today so that we can have some kind of normalcy in terms of people getting back employment and people looking at these types of things going forward. We're going to need heavy investment in agriculture, and we're going to need heavy investment in the marketing and distribution of our agricultural sector again. And this is where the state comes in terms of helping especially small farmers to move their products around, as the supply chain that they normally plug into is now changing. And we need a kind of state support to help them to move these things around. So we're going to have significant investment in agriculture as well. Similarly, we're going to need significant investment in the digital infrastructure. We're going to have much more investment in our bandwidth, because a lot of the works that are going to stimulate the economy, as I said before, will be coming from the creative economy, the digital economy. We need more bandwidth. We're going to need more spectrum so that the people can actually have this activity going. So again, significant investment is going to be needed there. And finally, yes, I'll wrap up by saying where we're going to need some also significant investment in the post-COVID environment is in the human capital element. So I'm putting those on the table that we can have some discussion around those critical areas if we're to stimulate the economy post-COVID.
Excellent points. And while I wait to hand over to Ms. Nadine Spence, I just want to welcome listeners on Love FM to our discussion here on COVID-19 here and afterwards. Ms. Spence, I'll welcome your comments now.
Thank you very much, and thanks to Ms. Wilkinson and the church for the invitation. I think to respond to a comment that was made earlier when we started the opening remarks, one of the things I noted in this response is the absence of the church on the front line. So I come from a community in St. Elizabeth called Kilmarnock, which is a marginal community. And there are two churches in that community, a United Church on the Westmoreland side of Kilmarnock and a Moravian Church on the St. Elizabeth side. The other newer church is a Pentecostal and a Salvation Army. But I think in the absence of the organization of the church on the ground, talking to the sick and the shut-in, especially in the rural parts, a whole set of our people have been missed in planning for and in thinking through the impact of this on the lives of a number of Jamaicans. And so I think this is something that the church has to come back to and think through. But before I get into that, the idea of protection under COVID-19, I read a quote that I like in response to this, and it's facing the same storm but not in the same boat. And we've heard a lot of conversations about this whole issue of social distancing, for example, and what social distancing might mean for different people depending on where they're socioeconomically located. And I have seen how some Jamaicans have responded by locating that within a community as opposed to a home, by protecting their community, by making sure that people protect themselves when they're coming in. And so even though we've had that challenge of social distancing because of some of the realities that our housing and community situation presents, I'm also heartened by the fact that some Jamaicans have responded in a very proactive way to extend the idea of home to the community and not being as singular and individual in the response. So in the matter of how the citizen is impacted and the likely impact on the citizen, I want to look at the health impact and the socioeconomic impact, and I'd want to start off with looking at how we have managed to protect the vulnerable. And as you said, we've had 9 deaths in Jamaica, which is amazing. We've done remarkably well, but if you think about our health profile, you can imagine that we have done even better, because as a people who have high instances of NCDs, non-communicable diseases, diabetes, high blood pressure, heart diseases, and so on, the fact that we are only saying 9, people must recognize, is a small miracle, perhaps a bigger one, but for now, let's count that as as a big plus. One of the things that happened in South Africa is that they really shut down their economy hard, shut down their society hard, prevented drinking. And I hear Jamaicans complaining, and I would like Jamaicans to take a broad view and look at what has happened globally in respect of shutdowns. South Africa was one of those places where the shutdown was excessive, where people died in lines trying to get help from the government. And part of the reasons why the government spoke about needing to shut down in that way was because of the high instances of HIV, AIDS, and tuberculosis. And because they felt that if that got into their rural, poor communities, they would not have been able to contain the deaths. And so they came down on the citizens very, very hard in terms of trying to keep people inside. And they faced even tougher situations as it relates to housing than us. But the matter of people with compromised immune systems is a huge matter that we need to pay attention to. And if you were paying attention online, you would have seen the different organizations that support people with HIV, AIDS, reaching out to people, the trans community, the LGBTQ community, talking to them about staying protected, about those people living with HIV, AIDS, taking their medication, ensuring that they keep their viral loads low, and just sending the message that if you protect yourself, then we are likely to see a better fatality rate than most other countries. In Jamaica, those who have died from COVID-19, including the 4-year-old child in Montego Bay, have been people with underlying conditions. So the truth of it is, where we have managed to shield those who are vulnerable, the likely impact is less devastating than, say, an Italy or in other places where the elderly were not shielded as much. And in Jamaica, again, the elderly, again, wherever you go, are a vulnerable population. But again, we've seen the shielding of the elderly. And this for us is also different from, say, like in Europe, where older, and in America, where older people live in homes that are isolated from their family. In Jamaica, most of our older people live in homes. There's an intergenerational living arrangement, which means that it's easier for the disease to be brought to them in that case. But we've not found that that has been devastating as much as in other places, although some of those who contracted the disease from the Alorica, and we've heard of the Alorica cluster, did pass it on to members of their family. So one of the things we've heard in Jamaica as well is that 80% of those who contracted the disease are in the Alorica set did not have a chronic illness. It was mild, and so they weren't ill. They were walking around. So it tells us a lot about how, as a citizen, how our people have responded to being infected with the virus, and that if we continue to shield and protect those who are vulnerable, we are likely to see less devastating impacts on our population. We've seen just 9 deaths. To me, that's a huge win. For me, the starkest reality of this pandemic and its effect on the citizen is seen in the situation which transpired with Jody and Ferron, a young woman who did not have COVID-19 but who died from its effects because of stigma and a poor attitude to healthcare by some of our healthcare providers and institutions. Now remember, Jodian was thought to have the disease, and in essence she was denied medical care such that it could save her life. And she died. Her baby lived, but she died on a floor at the University Hospital of the West Indies. A young woman who went to school just next door at the University of the West Indies, and who, I assume, thought that she would give herself a better chance at having a safe and dignified delivery by paying perhaps over $500,000 at the St. Andrew's Memorial Hospital to have her baby, and yet she was denied that. Now, I don't know if you remember the dead baby scandal in 2015 and the things that came to light about the state of our health sector. And the reports that came out after are still available online, but I don't know that we've paid attention to the fact that in fact our healthcare situation in Jamaica has worsened since 2015. So we had a scandal and we created drama, but we never kept up. What would have happened in our hospitals and our healthcare institutions to have changed to the point where, regardless of what happened, we would have been able to provide the citizen with quality and effective healthcare? And I think we never followed up to know that the other situation that would have been devastating for our economy and our lives and our country is if we had a whole lot of people going into hospitals. Thankfully, the profile of the disease in Jamaica didn't lead to that. Now think about the health of the Ministry of Health prior to COVID-19, and the focus then was on curtailing the spread of, or curtailing NCDs, diabetes, hypertension, the Let's Move, what was it again? The Jamaica Moves campaign, I have it written here somewhere, and the health and wellness campaign as a response to the crisis in our health center. We didn't see that health sector, we didn't see it as a response to the crisis, but that program was a response to the crisis in our health sector and the need for healthcare response that was also preventative. And I think it means this has taught us that that is an imperative as we move forward in the post-COVID-19 era. Talking about how we live is important. Now in Jamaica, the profile of the disease changed. In Europe and China, it was a disease that, with a contraction rate that saw men getting the disease more. That changed in Jamaica. In Jamaica, over 60% of those who have contracted the disease are women. And for me, it's important that shines us a light on what we know as a decent work agenda and the matter of precarious work. Because I know that before the whole situation at Alorica broke out, there were workers in Alorica saying, we are being compromised because of our work situation. We are being made vulnerable because of the situation we are working under. Nobody paid them any attention. And so when the breakout happened at Alorica, it wasn't a secret. The workers were saying it before. So precarious work, how are our workers employed? And do we have unions in Jamaica or people who care for the interest of workers, who are looking out for how our workers are engaging in work, especially at a time when people desperately want employment? A huge impact has been on domestic workers. The sector has almost been decimated because of the nature of domestic work in people's private homes and the intimate nature of the work involved and the need for social distancing. And the government gave the grant, the compassionate grant, and some of them got $10,000. But the sector has been saying we're suffering and they don't know how they're going to manage or when they're going to be put back to work. But the whole issue of the domestic workers union and its legitimacy and whether or not people listen to the domestic workers union and Jamaica's signing of C-189, which spoke to the need to engage domestic workers in a particular way, is brought to question because we have not, I think, given much attention to how domestic workers are impacted. And then other issues came up with education and the digital and technological divide. And I manage a hall of residence at UWI Mona, and I was literally online begging, still am begging credit for my students to access classes. Professor, it's one of the things that I've always had a problem with UWI. There seems to be a lack of awareness that a lot of our students come from very rural communities where there's no access to the internet. I remember a couple of years ago, I tried to get a young man from Kilmarnock to apply to UWI, and this was what happened. He has his subjects. He had to go to Black River to apply online at the library. I gave him money to go one time. When he went, the internet at the library was down. So he had to come back home. I think the second time somebody else gave him money, same thing happened. He gave up on university after that. He's qualified, but we have an online application system. And so now we've learned that there are so many people who are not connected to this great panacea called the World Wide Web and the internet, and that scores of Jamaicans are left out of opportunities because they cannot do their applications online, because they cannot access education, and so on. We've seen teachers on the front line, majority women, nurses on the front line, majority women, the informality in our economy. Yesterday, being on the COVID task force, we've been talking about opening bars and recognizing that on the southern coast of Jamaica, that is a huge economic activity, and that by shutting down bars, families are impacted in such negative ways that the matter of opening bars, and I'm saying this in the Church of God, is important to the survival of families and corner shops. And then again, I spoke to rural alienation. When yesterday I took packages to some of the shut-ins in Kilmarnock. These are people who nobody has made contact with as it relates to this, where the gleaner is not delivered to that community. It never was. If you get the gleaner, it's going to be 2 or 3 months back. And there are lots of communities like this across Jamaica, Bethel Town, in the hills of Westmoreland, in the hills of St. Catherine, where people remain alienated and do not get information, and so stay out of the loop when it comes on to getting important information. So for me, these are the things that have, lots more, but that are sitting on my mind now as critical. Housing is another issue. And we saw the Paris Loyer study about how our housing philosophy needs to change and how we need to build houses so that people can live in dignity, And so it's a lot of issues for us to think through as we think about restoring the economy, because these are the things that have made people vulnerable to COVID-19.
Interesting, very interesting concept and perspective on COVID and what it holds. I'm now going to invite Dr. Ernestine Watson to share with us her perspective as a business person. Can you call you small or medium-sized business, Dr. Watson? Just indicate to us, how does the business sector fit in there?
Good afternoon, everyone, and of course, thank you for having me. And coming from the perspective of business, it's very, very important that we recognize the role that the business, the small, the medium, the micro business will do for the return to normalcy post-COVID. I'd like to just add here, we should really think about hope as a Christian and operator of a business. I want to share with us that we need to unplug negativity and plug into positivity and keep hope alive. Because with all of what is happening, persons become sad, persons become depressed. I'm a pharmacist by profession, and one role that I find we see as health professionals is that when persons become discouraged, you can tell them all kinds of things, and until they move past that discouragement and that feeling of inability and lack of purpose, you really don't get much done. As businesses, some of the things that we would have to look at is what was our position as businesses before COVID struck. How we respond with a lot of it would depend on where we were before. A lot of businesses were just at the point of taking a breather. Years of inability to access proper finances, dealing with the 1990s, and yes, the FinSac, that was real for most businesses. Even if you were not FinSacked, so to speak, you had to deal with the fallout that came with the FinSac. You also had to do with looking at the formality of the business. So in Jamaica, a lot of the businesses are not really in a formalized, having organizational structures in place. How long have they been in business? What is their why? What was the stock levels pre-COVID? Their supplies, were they living on a, just like the corner shops, for example, they would buy goods every 2 days or every day to restock. And so if you had a situation where they had to be in lockdown, how long would that individual be out of stock? So it means, therefore, that that store may have to close. We also have the reasons why the business is in existence. Building, what is the focus? Is it just a case of earning $1? Is it a planned business? Or is it a case where this business is a generational business? So you have wealth being passed down through the generations. And so learning can take place. Whereas for somebody who is just starting a business, there's no tradition of business. I heard Michael Lee Chin, he said that his first degree was behind shop counter. And that presented a family tradition of learning how to operate a business. Then we have things like, what keeps you grounded? When you see situations arising that are so difficult, what is it going to keep you going? Because it can be a momentous occasion when all of a sudden you have a lockdown, stocks are running low, you never had a good credit rating before, and now you are depleted. So after 14 days of lockdown, what are you going to do? How are you going to restock? Your suppliers are not going to hand you credit if you were not in a credit situation with them before. And now all of a sudden you now have to restart the business. How are you going to come out of those type of setbacks? What type of operation? Is it like right now, persons who are in the business, in medical business, pharmacies, they have a ready market. But there are other operations like those in tourism and so, people who do catering, entertainment business, party supplies, they are out of contact, inability to restock, inability to find a market. How are they going to move on? Is the operation dependent on what level of personnel do you have? Are they equipped to do the type of analyses and the specialized reporting and analysis that would be needed for you to jump past the current hurdle? Is this business able to come up with solutions? How readily are they able to come up with solutions? Is the management solution oriented? We look at the staff. A lot of the businesses, and especially when you look at a small or a micro business, the staff level of training is at the basic level. Look at the directors of the business. A lot of the times Jamaican businesses are at the hustle mood. So there is not any specific organization that is going to be able to deal with sudden shocks. The staffing, is staff able to manage these changes that come on? And then with the directors, what is the directors' focus? Are they for the business and neglecting the staff feelings? How are the employees going to be treated in this new scenario? Is it that the management and directors are going to look out for themselves and forget what is happening in the lives of the employee? And what about staff loyalty? Because how the staff had been treated before is going to make a big difference. So post-COVID or even during COVID, how they are going to go through these changing circumstances. Looking at the customer, the relationship you had with your customers. All of a sudden, the customers now their cash is low. How were you treating the customers before? Do they have any loyalty to your business, to come back to your business? Or would they just go wherever they can get goods the cheapest? Or is it that the service that they received before is going to carry you through? Were there any loyalty programs, rewards? What is your customer profile? What is the makeup of the customers that you serve? In my business as a pharmacy, we depend, our customer, the relationships with our customer are not just you come and you purchase. We develop long-term relationships because it is health. And there is a trust between the pharmacists and the customers, as well as between the regular staff members. So that, I believe, is going to be an advantage to a business where there is a customer loyalty that has been built up over the years. And then in terms of flexibility, right now, you are no longer able to have face-to-face meetings. Customers are not coming in store to purchase. So how are you going to go around that? Lots of methods. We have curbside shopping, pre-packaged packages, so persons just come and pick up. Going online, is that available? But for example, Nadine mentioned earlier about some areas where that is not even a possibility. So face-to-face contact, we now have to ensure that there is safety in the type of interactions. Probably you may have to consider for the elderly developing ways of delivering goods and services to these persons. And then the next big factor is that of the government policies. Right now, is there sufficient recognition of the important role of SMEs, micro, small, medium enterprises? Is it that the government is going to put funding behind these enterprises to support them, to enable them, to facilitate so that their development and their growth will help to tide us through? And to get, Dr. Williams spoke about needing a 3% growth. You have to find areas where you are most likely to get that growth coming. And we do know that small, medium, micro enterprises, that is one of the areas that we can get that growth. If sufficient training, education, and facilitation by the government for these industries.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for those comments, everybody. I'm going to look at some questions coming from the public and just some issues that came out of the presentations you all made. Small business. It is felt that the small businesses are more agile and more easy to adapt. What should small businesses be doing, and to what extent can the government now adjust this process as we try to jumpstart the economy? Professor Williams, you wanna take that first? And then I get the comments from others. Small businesses are more agile, it is felt, than big business, but they need a little help there.
Right. Thanks, Orville, and thanks to the persons who posed the question. Small businesses do have that greater agility than large and established corporations, as Dr. Ernestine has just identified. What is needed, however, as I said, there are some critical things that need to be established at the small business level. One, cash management is key. That is going to be very, very important. They need to be able to have better management of their working capital. They need to be able to have good management of their cash. They will need to have great relationship with their banks, because their banks are going to become very important in an environment like this to offer the types of credit that is going to be needed to deal with supply chain issues, to deal with stock taking, to deal with rescheduling loan payments and all of these kinds of things. So good relationship with your bank is important. From a public policy perspective as well, what we're going to need is for government to provide significant support in terms of policies to deal with furloughing of staff. You're going to have to deal with issues of liquidity and how these things go to these small business. You're going to have to make provisions for the kinds of requirements that are needed for small businesses to make application for things like government contracts and stuff, so that they can speed it up. It can be speeded up, so to give them greater ability to participate in that area of the economy. So these are some of the public policy issues that the government will have to contend with as well. And most important, the small business have to now stay close to their customers. It's very, very important that they have a good relationship with their customers.
Professor, to you and the other panelists, but most small business people say they don't have the capability to do that negotiation with the government to adjust to that new technology. As we point out, some of them don't even have access to the internet to go online, that new relationship with the customer. What role should the government be playing in this day and age with the DBJs and the Jamaica Business Development? Should we be now seeing a stepping up of that, some kind of task force to help? We have now got the interest rates down. For a long time we said what we needed was low interest rates. But you need a bit more than interest rates. I'll put it to you first. You are the small business operator.
Thank you. I don't think we need a task force. There are lots of studies. There are lots of... If you go to any of these, the DBJs, whichever organization you need to go to, the studies are there, the programs are there, the plans are there. What we need now is implementation. I'll give you an example. One of my colleagues who runs a small business, it took her over 4 years to complete a loan arrangement for a development of a project which had the capabilities of employing over 30 persons, and which, if that project, as it is now up and running, and it is being touted as a major breakthrough, what is happening is that a lot of the red tape. So, for example, a grant is there. You, as a small business, try to access the grant, and there are so many hurdles and sometimes it's just people. It's just a people issue. A lot of the times also the policies that are put in place, the government depends on the banks.
It's not business friendly.
Not business friendly, and the government is still dependent on the banks to implement. And the banks are a hurdle for small businesses. They are literally a stumbling block. That's one of the things I was going to mention. The requirements for banking does not facilitate growth of especially micro and small businesses. The same persons get the loans repeatedly. The same persons are the beneficiaries repeatedly.
Nadine, you want to comment on that? Does the government have a role here as we try to jumpstart?
Yeah, I think one of the things that we have to think about is how our political leader, who our political leaders are, and the people who you know as MPs, who sit as ministers, what do they really know about these processes? And I find that a lot of the times, the people who should develop and put forward the legislative agenda, who should implement through policies that work, have no idea how it works. And so there's a disconnect between what should happen on the ground and what the legislative and policy agenda should be. And I think because we tend, I don't know, I honestly believe that our political leaders do not make that connect between the issues that Dr. Watson just highlighted and the fact that their job is to solve that. They're involved in too much politicking rather than responding to the challenges of the person who is trying to create a space in the economy. And I think that for me, there's just this disjoint. And so for them, I think it's about how do I ensure that people are voting in the next elections, and then for that reason, who are the people I then target to vote, who as opposed to how do I work up here, so where I am, in wherever government is located, to make sure that those issues are solved. I see a huge disconnect between the work of our political directorate and the needs of our population.
So are you saying that the politicians need to reconnect at the constituency level? We are divided up into 63 constituencies for a reason.
Yes.
They need to get on the ground
to
find out what are the real problems,
right,
and then make that representation in the government system to have the kind of change so we can catalyze
right.
that
And I
movement.
think too that small businesses like Ernestine's need to sit with these people and explain to them, this is what your agenda should be. This law needs to change, this process needs to change. These are the things you need to do, because those people are not going to figure it out and do it. They're not. And so we need people who are much more engaged in the process of governance and engaging our political leaders, going to Garden House and wherever their ministry offices is, and holding them accountable and not stopping until we get the results that we want. Because it's not going to happen just so. It's not going to happen. Studies on top of studies on top of studies have been done, but moving that to where it is going to cause impact is not going to happen.
We definitely don't need another study. I agree, Nadine, and there are many organizations, many working groups who try to make representation. Yes, they would come, they would listen to you. For example, I recently completed a women's entrepreneurship course, a one-year program where women from different types of businesses came together under a World Bank funded study, and we went through the processes of how to digitalize, how to market, the normal things. And we made representation at the end of our program. These are some of the things that we find are lacking. They listened, but then when they go back to the table, wherever it is, you don't see the effect.
Because that should have been followed up by these 6 pieces of legislation need changing. There's a policy in this ministry that isn't working. There's a process. That is how we have to advocate. Not just with the issue, but with here is how we see the response. These are the things that you need to change.
Within the context of the jumpstart, how we operationalize this now.
Well, one of the things I will say, I'm not here to bat for banks and stuff, but one of the things I will say is that I'm happy you mentioned things like the JBDC and those things, because what we really need are institutions that work. We need institutions to facilitate the small business that do not have the kind of resources to respond to the kinds of shocks that we're seeing. Take, for example, the issue of the banking. The truth is that a lot of the times, it's not that the banks are onerous, when an application comes in for a credit, there are just certain things that from a prudential financial management that you will require of any business, any individual to have. What you find in most cases that these small businesses do not have them because they are not running a professional way. All right, and because of the lack of professionalization of these businesses, then they're not able to meet the requirements for the banks, etc. Now, in some cases, the banks will try to be flexible, but there are other cases that it's almost impossible for them to be flexible because they have regulatory things that they have to meet, they have legal things that they have to meet, they have all kind of standards that they have to meet. So what we need are the institutions like the DBJ, as you said, the JBDC, and the micro businesses associations, etc., to now provide you with a network as to how you can help these small businesses to become much more professional, and having become much more professional, they will be able to access a lot more resources. That's really what I think is needed.
I don't agree totally, because yes, there is a need for formalization of small and micro, medium-sized businesses, but these examples that I have given you are for businesses that have met all of the requirements, and just the disbursement of the loan would take 6 months. There are times
I find
when,
that surprising, though.
yes,
if you meet all the requirements,
you meet
and
the
you tick all the
requirements.
boxes,
Sometimes
the disbursement shouldn't take that long.
a simple thing like the person is on leave. That person goes on leave for 3 weeks. That document is left at the desk.
Is that private sector or government?
Private sector.
I find that strange.
Private sector. Yes.
That's strange.
You find it strange, but it is a reality.
Well, we got
It is
a lot
a
of work to
reality.
do. Let me just move to another area based on some questions that are coming out. Getting back into the new work situation, working from home. How do we see this now panning out? A lot of companies are making arrangements for persons to work at home, and you had the concern about those people who don't have the resources, the internet connection, the devices, the money to buy the credit. I mean, a lot of this played out in the whole exercise when schools were closed and people had to conduct classes from school. This is going to be a very important part of coming out of COVID. I think a lot of us are looking forward to the streets not being packed with traffic anymore. I want to maintain that, although I don't think the gas stations are too happy with that one. But how do we really operationalize that? Is the whole question of, say, bandwidth that can be solved easily? Do the government now have to put more resources into the budget that the internet, the companies who provide the internet service? Is it that they're going to have a subsidy, a redirection of resources? Government is talking about the digital economy. Is that now going to be one of the areas, it's a public good, that we're going to have to put resources in?
Well, there are two things. So there's both a public policy imperative and there's a private imperative as well. From the public policy perspective, as you correctly identified, the government will have to make much more investment into the broad infrastructure, making sure that private companies can have better access to the spectrum that is going to be used to drive the digital transformation. But then there will also have to be very clear legislative agenda to suggest that private companies must make certain amount of investment in their network to ensure that we can have the kind of service. So regulatory standards will have to be looked at in terms of service delivery and the kinds of things that these private companies are actually doing, because as you know, it is not cheap to invest in a network and to provide the kinds of services all over. So we also have to look at the type of technology that we use. Are we going to use microwave, or are we going to use broadband? All those kinds of things will have to be looked at, but that's from the public bureaucracy perspective. From the private perspective, companies are going to have to now reorient the way that they actually provide compensation to people, because you're going to have, if you're going to ask more people to work from home, you're going to have to provide the kind of equipment that is needed. You're going to have to also ensure that people have the kinds of space in their house to actually work from home. All of these things will have to be taken into consideration, because you can't just make the assumption that you're saying that people should work from home and they have all of the necessary infrastructure to work from home, and then you just pay them the same way. So you have to look at how you're going to now restructure compensation and the kinds of working working relationship that people are going to have and the kinds of resources that they are going to provide to the employee to actually facilitate that.
Comments from you ladies, because
yeah.
this is a new workspace.
I think as well that part of what I've been thinking about where that is concerned is the whole matter of the issues we've had with productivity, and you spoke about the transportation and traffic, and a huge impact on that has been traffic, has been transportation, has been people getting up at 4 o'clock to take the buses to get to work. Childcare is important in that respect. And so one of the legislative imperatives that I think comes out of this is the idea of the flexi work week and flexi work day. We don't all have to leave for work at 4 in the morning. We can imagine different possibilities during the day because we have to think now about how we engage public transportation and how much people we want on a bus. Perhaps we can stagger the times of day people go to work so that rush hour is not 1 time or 2 times of the day anymore. So people spend less time in traffic. I think organizations are going to have to do more for childcare and the parents in their workspace who have to send children to school, pick up children from school and the nursery. What can they do in their companies to provide daycare facilities for the parents who are there, who have to rush to go pick up a child who had left school at 3 o'clock and might be somewhere on the street, or a child who has to leave home at 4 in the morning, but school don't start until 8:30. So there are serious, I think, and interesting ways that we can reconfigure the idea of work, getting to work and work. And I think this issue of the digital divide is hugely important. And we have to ask ourselves how much people in Jamaica actually have access to the internet. We are recognizing that not a lot of people have access to the internet. How much people can afford a computer? Are the prices on the free market for a computer that everybody can get in the US too high in Jamaica? Have we allowed the markup to go to the point where a whole section of our population do not have access to something as simple as a regular laptop? You know, and then we recognize as well that in the home nowadays, a desktop computer sitting somewhere doesn't help. So, you know, just reimagining those things with and for the citizen is an important part of the agenda, I think. Flexi work, transportation, childcare, the school day, and what is in the home as technology and the digital, the internet and the availability of digital technologies is hugely important, I think.
I would like to raise the point of security. For example, the average home in Jamaica ranges from well secured to absolutely no security. And you can imagine having these tablets and these pieces of equipment in a home. How is it going to be protected? And then in terms of affordability, shouldn't the taxes be removed from these things so at least it makes it cheaper for persons to acquire it? That's one. Then in terms of the personnel, the training, the capabilities, a simple thing like, for example, over the last 2 weeks, JPS has been going, they destroyed my backup system, they destroyed my, the cameras, the security cameras were destroyed. How are we going to protect against that when a business has to equip staff to be at home and the electricity goes, destroys the equipment? Who is going to be responsible? The home is broken into. Who is going to be responsible? All of these considerations. We put up security lights outside the pharmacy, and we have had, it's about 10 lights we have changed so far. The last attempt, we did a perpendicular thing where we hoisted it was hoisted onto the building and projected at an angle so that persons couldn't go on the building to reach it. In the heights of the curfew, the light was stolen a week ago. When we looked at the camera to see what happened, they were able to go around the camera to take the lights. So security is an important factor. And then we talk about culture. We are talking about expanding the broadband and so persons are saying 5G caused COVID. How are we going to deal with that? Is it going to be an educational point that we have to begin to get our citizens to understand that it wasn't the 5G that caused the COVID, and so the telecommunications companies are constantly saying that they have to be replacing stolen or destroyed
Yes.
cables.
Yes, yes. Is it now appearing to us that the government now has to now drive that process of moving the economy to this digital divide? Because there seems to be a number of components. We're talking about the question of bandwidth. We're talking about standards for the utility companies, the providers of that service. We're talking about a gap in terms of training the individual. So we have to expand literacy with digital literacy. And perhaps maybe it is one way to some of the persons who have lost jobs at the university, who are unemployed, could be part of a task force, who could be very active in getting persons on board through actual workshops rather than something theoretical. We are talking about people lining up at the bank to get money, and we want to get them into the more digital space, perhaps using the phone, as we have such a high telephone density. Who is going to drive that process? Is there need for, well, you could comment, you're on the COVID task force. Who is going to lead the process, or what kind of cooperation we're going to have? Is it just the government and the private sector? We spoke about the politicians playing a role. Where is the opposition in all of this? Or is civil society? And at the point you made in your country town in Westmoreland, to what extent can the church facilitate the process as we are doing here today by having that discussion?
Okay, well, one of the things there are two tensions in this conversation about the recovery of the economy. And one of the things I hear people a lot, and I talk to the women that I engage who are part of quote-unquote civil society, which I am the proxy for civil societies in a number of ways, which makes you know that people don't get it, is that, somehow or the other we envision that the economy is closed down and we're going to fix it and then open it back. And then all of these things are going to be fixed. And that's not going to happen. That's not going to happen. I believe in an informed and involved citizenry. And I believe that Jamaicans, through churches, through community groups, through whichever situations they are, have to start organize themselves to get those who sit at the seat of power to respond. And that seat of power might be for those in the private sector, in the public sector, and the different spaces of the public sector, to start reorient their agenda to suit the reality of our times. The COVID-19 Recovery Task Force has a number of committees that are looking at different realities of our economy. One of the committees, I'm not a part of that committee, is called the New Economy, which is looking at a number of initiatives for the transformation, the even greater transformation of the Jamaican economy, and to take some of these things into consideration. There's also a committee that is looking at the whole issue of the digital divide and closing the divide, and some of what Professor Williams had raised about the kinds of technology we need to drive that digital technology. So I think those things are being considered. As it relates to who sits at that table, I think a number of people have said to the government, we would have liked to see greater participation from different groups of people, the opposition, the church, academia, and so on. What has happened where that is concerned. And I think that is happening in different spaces where people are saying, need a wider cross-section of people to consider this matter. And I think as well that tomorrow, just last week, we got a meeting invitation because there's this wider partnership called the Partnership for Social Transformation, which began under the began under the Bruce Golding government, and continued through the Portia Simpson-led government and continues through this government, which is supposed to be a broad coalition of different organizations, including the church, a broader civil society body, the trade unions, different groups of business leaders who are meeting tomorrow morning as, again, and the opposition, I think, to respond to that idea that perhaps we have to bring the social partnership on board because we need a wider set of voices at the table. So I think that, again, and that comes from involved citizenry, saying, hey, wait a minute, them people here not sitting at the table and we want them there. So I think that's what we need to do as citizens. We have to recognize that our voices count, and we have to speak up, and we have to ask, and we have to make sure that the information we have get to the people who need to hear it, or else we are just talking. And if we don't get on with that idea that a democracy is a conversation between different groups of people, then we are going to be the ones who lose. The government will do what government will do if the citizens allow them to get away with it. When the citizens become involved, it changes things.
What role can the church play now? And you're speaking to an audience with other church people listening to this, to move from the high-level task force to mobilizing at the community level so that people can get to understand why they need to get into the new space, why they need to perhaps learn to use their phone to transfer money, to what extent they can use that phone. A farmer has a couple of acres of pumpkin. He has an idea of when the pumpkin will be ready, that it can go into some central place so that we can have better supply logistics, the supply lines. I mean, how can we, what kind of role can communities play? Interestingly, last night at speech with President Obama to the graduating class, he was making the point, you know, the system might be failing you. Get in your communities and get the work done from that level up. Is that what we're advocating? So we push those at that level.
Yeah, I honestly believe that no government can rule for me. I don't trust no government that way. I think that every Jamaican, from every byway, every hedge, every street and lane, must decide this is what I need to survive in the next era going forward. And government might be a part of that agenda, but other people are as well, including the church. So I need to go have a conversation with them to say, hey, you fit in here, so what are you going to do? The church now, especially evangelical churches, like your church, the churches who founded free villages and are in every nook and cranny of Jamaica, they have to get up and start working, a different kind of missioning.
Out of the sanctuary.
Out of the sanctuary. Church is just keeping church.
Yes.
Church just a keep church. What about going to the people who need you and organizing on a community level? The farmer. I come from a Moravian family. My people in my community got the land they live on because the Moravian church after slavery decided that to get membership, we have to give people land. It's a reciprocal relationship. I don't just keep church to take offering. There people have material needs. And as I said to you, a lot of what we need for those most vulnerable, the elderly, the sick, and the shut-in is that the church has to work. It's the church who know where those people are. It's the church who engage the most vulnerable, the elderly and the sick, because at that time people feel vulnerable, they go to church. How does the church respond in this time is what I am propositioning, especially for those people who are isolated in rural communities and we no longer pay attention to. That, I think, is the power of the church, is putting itself to work by developing an agenda for change around those people.
Yeah, Orville.
Yes.
So I'm happy you asked about the church, because that's a very powerful organizational structure that I think is very useful in a time like this. The church can do a lot and has been doing a lot, I must say. But in a context like this, there are two major things that I think the church could focus on, and that's public advocacy. The church needs to inform itself of all the relevant issues that we're talking about, get well equipped, and the church has a captive constituent, or if you want to call it audience, that they can now pass on this information to. They listen, they respect their elders, they respect their preachers and stuff, so they can do public advocacy on behalf of the citizenry by firstly informing themselves about what needs to be done, how things are being done, where things are being done. So that's one public advocacy area. The second thing has to do with mobilization. I think the church is very well positioned to mobilize people to get out there and do some of the things that Nadine spoke about, for example, or getting the people organized to take on the role that they have done. It's so interesting to me.
More than just distributing the care packages.
No, absolutely. That's what I'm saying. It's not just about distribution and handout.
Yes.
To get them to be more activists in the types of things that they're going to do. So it is interesting to me that we're having Labor Day next weekend. Right? And we say we're opening up back the economy, but we're closing down for Labor Day. That's the irony of it. I think that will be a time when you want your people to be most active. You're clearly going to have to ensure that they follow the health protocols, etc. But this is a time when you need to give them a chance to have their creativity, starting to think about how we're going to be transforming ourselves going forward, and implement some of these projects that they're going to do, clearly observing the health protocols. Unfortunately, what we're seeing is the reverse, that we close it even tighter over that period when our people are supposed to be exercising and implementing the kinds of creativity that they would have done on Labor Day. Labor Day actually is significant, Yes. It's not just a time for partying and carrying on.
Should be a day to strategize
yes,
about
I would have
after
expected
COVID.
that is a point that is going to be facilitating greater creativity implementation, but instead what we see is greater locking down of the people. So I think the church can play a great part in mobilizing as well.
Okay,
Yes.
for me, the church as a building block for small, medium, and micro enterprises. For example, if you look in any congregation, there are lots of talents, and so training for building businesses can take place through the church. Networking. So, for example, finding ways to offload. We do it very well for harvest. When we have our harvest, annual harvest, we have persons come in and we do get an exchange of products, and so that can be on an ongoing basis. We have opportunities for us to hold, say, like
Financial
expose,
literacy.
Financial literacy exposed, where we actually have tents set up in the church compounds, and have persons come in, persons who would bring their products, bring their businesses to the community, and the members of the church can participate, having a diary or a digest of all of the different businesses that are available. So, for example, if you need a special training and that is in the church, that person can be assisted, you know. So, in terms of networking, it's a very important way that the church can come out. And then the second thing is education, because that's what we do. We study the Bible, we learn things, and so instead of keeping it to ourselves, we need to get out there and share and make it as simple as possible. Because a lot of the times the message is out there, but the persons are not receiving it. Something is sent out, but there is no reception, and we need to address that.
Can I add something to what
Sure.
Professor Williams said? You spoke about May 23, Labor Day. One of the things that Labor Day has become over the years is not a day where we recognize the rights of the worker, what it is intended to do. It's a day where the government puts on projects and people participate. But we saw this the other day with Alarica. We saw it. I walk into a haberdashery, and the women in there start whispering to me, "Them can make me take me sick day if me not sick." People don't know their rights as workers, because the trade unions, because of their close affiliation with the political parties, no longer are focused on teaching workers their rights, or making them become familiar with the legislative arrangements as it relates to the average workday and the compensation and the rights that workers access in the workday. All we hear is that the nature of work and the contract nature of work makes it impossible for unions to organize. No, it makes it the environment within which unions organize different. It has changed. How do they organize? How do they make sure that workers know their rights? There are different ways to do this. What we do on May 23, and we all allow it, is we go out and do a community project. That's not what the day is for. It's about regarding, respecting, honoring the rights of the citizen as worker. And so this year, because we can't do a project, we don't have a Labor Day. And I'm happy that Prof brought that up, because I've been saying it from ever since. May 23 is called Labor Day because of labor. And we have abandoned that project in Jamaica, and we no longer pay attention. You spoke about, again, the school, and church education in Jamaica started with churches. And so this whole business of the digital divide can be addressed through the work of the church.
Certainly the whole question of the workers, the new work world, working from home, is worthy of a discussion in the new dispensation. What will that mean? And some of those issues discussed, the whole business about safety in the workplace. You know, you wanted to make a point. I think you wanted to make a comment on that. I have another question. We're going to wrap up in another 10 minutes or so, but there's a question which has been burning about the reliance on the hotel industry, and is the time come to reevaluate our position where that is concerned? Is that really going to be possible in the new dispensation? We have heard a lot of announcements about opening up in June, opening up in August, but
let's be clear though, Orville. The kind of economy that we operate, services will be a big part of that economy.
Yes.
And so we cannot now say that we're going to close off the economy from hotel, from tourists, etc., because that's a big part of what we do. The issue is how does this new economy surrounding the tourism sector is going to look, because clearly there has to be some serious health protocols surrounding visitor arrival when they come to a show, what they do, etc. But I can say to you that this is a big part of Jamaica's economy. As you would know from your own work and stuff, services account for almost 65% of your GDP.
Absolutely.
So you cannot easily ignore that. And that is a reality that we have to face. So the issue is, how are we going to now structure our hotels to make sure that our visitors are safe, and therefore and also make sure our workers are safe, and also make sure that our communities that these hotels operate in are safe. I've seen a number of issues around the types of protocols that they're putting in place. I mean, I don't want to comment on those now because it's kind of too early. But we have to have the conversation, as I would say at this stage. We have to have the conversation, and the conversation must be a balance between making sure that livelihood is there and making sure that the economy is there. That to me is where the conversation has to be.
And one of the things that I'd like to raise with respect to the tourist industry is the fact who we are as a Caribbean people. We are entertainers, we are service oriented, we are persons who are creative. So that whole aspect of our life, we cannot ignore it.
Yes.
We have to rebuild it and retrain it so that we can get the best of both worlds. One of the things that I look at in terms of the development of agriculture, probably what we need to be looking at is what portion of the food and the services were imported rather than the use of local talents, or being the agricultural sector being a direct feeder for the tourism industry. But then, in addition to that, we have to look at basic things like security. A lot of persons are discouraged from farming because of the theft and the crops. I mean, you plant, persons have fish farms and they can't reap anything. So if we want to refocus, we have to look at how are we going to protect the farmers who have put in the investment and cannot reap the rewards.
I hear Roger Clark talking about the 2-foot push now, right? Yes, that's important. And I raise the question because we have invested so much in the hotel industry, and the problems we have heard in agriculture shows how well the linkage program with agriculture has worked. We just have to find a creative way to look at it now, and there are discussions about how we manage that supply chain. A lot of creativity is taking place in terms of farmers markets all over the place in Kingston, and we're getting rid of some of the stuff we have not got it right, but it's also an opportunity. And don't forget, COVID is also an opportunity, because only 9 people died here. So as a destination for persons to come to, this is a pretty attractive destination which has managed COVID to a point. So persons who have, as they say, cabin fever, who want to come out of the house, maybe this is a good place for them to go, and perhaps maybe that's why the tourist industry, the hotel industry is so excited about the new possibilities. So it's not all doom and gloom.
Right.
And yes.
That's
Yes,
true.
go ahead.
And
Yeah.
I want to say, on the recovery task force, that's a conversation. How do you protect citizens and protect visitors? Because you don't want to start back and then you have an outbreak, and then people run away again and you have to close. And we were having a conversation with a small hotel operator the other day who said, I'm hesitating because I don't want to open and then have to shut down again. Some of the bigger ones might want to open now, but the matter of opening is not just because we want to make money, it's also that we have to offer visitors a safe vacation idea. And I agree with that, I agree with what you said, but I also think about, again, what we've been talking about labor and the precarious nature of work in tourism. That most of the people, 350,000 workers in the tourism sector lost their job, and they lost their job before the passage of the legislation around the pension scheme.
Yes.
So we have to do a lot to deal with a decent work agenda for tourism workers as well. And again, the work around workers' rights in Jamaica didn't really get going in the tourism industry and in the hotel industry. And so if we are accepting that has to be because of its contribution to our economy, it has to be a legitimate area of consideration, we have to think about who the workers are, and are we moving them from a situation of poverty to some kind of decent, dignified living through employment in tourism.
One of the areas I think really need to be looked at is that of housing. I couldn't leave here without raising it. I think a person's dignity, a lot of what we see happening, I believe, is as a response to the conditions under which persons are forced to live. And I believe that there is a need for a serious look at, for example, in tourism, housing must be a big part of the agenda. And in all areas, we need to move our people to a standard of living which permits them to at least have a decent home. Even if not necessarily, they may not have to own it, because all persons may not want to own a home, but it must be made available to them even if it is for rental purposes. And I think the state has a part to play in providing that.
It touches on another point that is being raised across the world, that the COVID has become an exposure on some of the awful situations between income distribution, and the opportunity should be used to try and reset that and to come up to that strategy, because even in a wealthy country like the US, we see the problem we had where 80% of the workforce was living from paycheck to paycheck, and we're having problems after even 1 month they didn't get paid. Think of when they had the shutdown of government. Not even talking about COVID with 3 months. 1 month and there's a problem. How are we going to strategize to address that divide right across the world, where the average, you have either the working class or the working poor, living from paycheck to paycheck, hand to mouth, as we'd say in Jamaica? Is that one of the legitimate things that we should get involved with, and perhaps the church can play a valid role where that is concerned?
Well, definitely. We have to look at people's standard of living. Worldwide, we have 1% owning 90% of the resources. It's not sustainable. And as a church, as believers, we need to play our part, and we need to agitate for better. Starting with just even our members. We need to look at the living conditions within our membership, even before we look outside, because inside it's within the church as well.
Well, it's a pastor must Christian picnic first, right?
That's right.
I think I'd respond to that by saying we have been seeing that income inequalities have been growing. The space between the haves and the have-nots has widened drastically, that there are people who are making super profits, and there are some people who can barely go to the supermarket. And it ties in back to the issue I had raised about the NCDs, the non-communicable diseases, and what Jamaicans can afford to eat. And most of our people cannot afford to buy vegetables, for example. They can't afford to eat anything but flour, rice, and sugar. Those are the things that are in the typical basket
That they can stretch.
that Jamaicans can stretch. And those are the things that cause them to be vulnerable to non-communicable diseases. That people don't really live in communities where they can exercise, where they can go outside and walk and run, because you mentioned matters of safety, but also that some of these communities do not have green spaces, do not have spaces for families to play. Like, I am so bothered by the National Housing Trust's housing philosophy, and these houses that they make that can't even accommodate a dining table, where there are no green spaces, where there are no community spaces, where they're just building dormitories for people to go to work and come back home, and where children are getting more asthma because of the way the air circulates in the home and so on. So when we're talking, I remember going to Barbados and hearing the Prime Minister there articulate a vision for the average Barbadian citizen. And she said something that blew my mind. She said, every Bajan must be able to swim. We live on an island. Swimming is a human right if you live on an island. In Jamaica, swimming is an upper class. People can pay for something as simple as a swimming class. And so we've created a society that is built on inequalities, and we price some people out of dignity. And we have to rethink that. We have to think about how we create these spaces of exclusion, and who becomes included in that idea of living a dignified life. And and then who becomes vulnerable? And this is what COVID-19 did. It pointed us to our areas. It kind of revealed more starkly the areas of inequality, and it showed us who the haves and the have-nots were. And it was nothing more stark than when people said social distancing, and people said, if four we sleep on one bed, how is that gonna be possible? If I live in an NHD quad with my 4 children, how is that possible? We have to think about it as granular, I think, as that.
Professor Woods, I want to put that back to you, because you raised the issue about government policy and how you spend the money, and how you said let us slash capital spending. Is it now a time to spend some money, particularly on some of the human issues? Talking about education, we're talking about public health that might come back. We have had a fair portion of the roads and all that kind of thing, and we want to have that infrastructure. But how about that human capital?
Orville, this is a very sobering note on which to wrap up the discussion, but I think it touches on the right agenda items, because what COVID has done is to give us a very clear reality check as to the levels of inequality that exists in our society. We have been talking about this for a long time, and I remember at some point when we talked about inequality, the normal retort was, but this is not a Jamaican problem, this is a worldwide problem.
Absolutely.
What COVID has done now is to bring it close to home, to show you that this is real, it is not a theoretical issue, it is real. And how can we deal with this issue in a more fundamental way? One, we have to invest more into the human capital. In essence, we have to educate our people more. We have no two ways about that, because you would appreciate that education is, I don't even want to say is one-off. I think it's the only sustainable mean of people escaping the trap of poverty, the only way. When you educate people, give them an opportunity, and they will think for themselves, and they will become creative and do the right thing. So you need to educate your people, and educating them, meaning that you're going to bring them right through the entire education value chain. There is a talk in Jamaica about educating for the primary, the secondary, and pre-primary level, and then leave the tertiary to fend for themselves. That's wrong. You have to educate everybody right through the entire system. And I'll
continuous education.
It has to be right through the entire system. So what it means is not a trade-off between primary and secondary and tertiary. It means funding education right up. And
Absolutely.
it is not unsurprising. I mean, it is not, it's not lost on us that one of the cuts in the recent budget is SLB, which actually fund tertiary students. I mean, it suggests to you where the priorities really are. So that is one issue. We have to educate, invest in the human capital. The second big issue, though, we have to make people starting to have ownership of property. Ownership of property. That helps significantly with the inequality issues. Why? Because when you now have your piece of title for your property, it can be used as a significant mortgage tool that you can now go to your institution. You can use it as a collateral to borrow for education, as a collateral to borrow for business, etc. Too many Jamaicans do not own anything. And we need to have more Jamaicans.
And it becomes a source of intergenerational wealth.
Absolutely. So that transformation, that land transformation, asset transformation is key to dealing with some of these inequality issues. And finally, I would say, as you talk about the capital projects, etc., and that's where I'm going again, let us really look at the structure of our budget and what we're doing. We still, yes, we have done an excellent job, I must admit, over the last decade or so to bring down debt to GDP ratio, bring down all of the ratios in line with what our international partners want, and we're getting good ratings on from our capital market rating agencies, etc. But is that the most important or significant thing? Where we are now, as I said, is a significant sacrifice that has to be made by everybody. And I am saying to you, cutting the capital budget by 30 billion is not the right thing to do today. Instead, what we should do is to call our holders of debt and say, we are not cutting you, we're asking to reschedule. There will be a better time that is going to come, and we can hold that until that time comes, and we will pay you, right? But right now, we need something to jumpstart these kinds of investment we're talking about, and I would not like to see the capital budget be slashed.
Well, on that note, we're going to wrap it up, but very good point. You have to invest in the human capital to prepare them for the COVID reset. And I just want to thank our panelists today. I'm going to start with, on my immediate left, my far left, Dr. Ernestine Watson. Did I pronounce it right? Ernestine, okay. Businesswoman and proprietor of Everybody's Pharmacy. Miss Nadine Spence. Most importantly, part of the COVID recovery task force, and we are depending on it to carry some of these key points that came out of this discussion to that process. Thank you for being a part of the discussion here today, and Professor Denzel Williams, and of course to you, the audience from Love FM, and all the persons here at the Webster Advocacy Group who put all this thing together. This has been a wonderful evening. This is something that hopefully we can take away and we can start something. And we're going to challenge all the church organizations listening to this broadcast to understand that you don't have to wait on Nadine's big task force. Mobilize in your communities and send the information up to her. And she's agreeing. Aren't you agreeing? That send her the mail and the suggestions. Invite them to come to your respective communities, to your respective churches, so we can play our own role jump-starting the economy in this new dispensation of COVID. Thank you all for being a part of it. To the cameramen, to all the organizers, have a good evening and stay safe. We will overcome.